Happy Thursday morning, everyone. Welcome into another edition of Morning Jocks. Conrad Van Order and Damian Mitchell here with you until 7 o'clock, getting you ready for another exciting weekend of college football, maybe even the most exciting weekend so far, if I dare say so myself, because it is going to be absolutely jam-packed starting tomorrow with a couple of actually pretty good games on Friday night. And then, of course, Saturday, we have a full slate to dive into. And arguably, in my opinion, the great or the best weekend that we've had so far. And maybe looking back at the end of the year, the best weekend that we will have overall for the college football season. So very, very exciting times. I know a lot of people very excited for this weekend. You've been looking ahead at the schedule in the summertime, and this was the weekend that you circled. You said, this is the one. This is the one we got to get to. Whether you're Alabama, Georgia, Auburn, and Texas A&M, you're Oregon fan, maybe you're a Penn State fan. Pretty big weekend for you as well. Of course, big weekend for LSU and Ole Miss and so many others. So can't wait to get to the weekend and enjoy all the games. And then, of course, come back next week and cover them all for you guys. But we got to get you ready for all the games coming up this weekend. So we spent a good bit of time yesterday talking about Alabama and Georgia. We'll talk a little bit more about that matchup today as well, but going to spend a little more time on Auburn and Texas A&M because this feels like a very big game for Auburn with what happened last weekend and trying to this weekend or next weekend salvage one of those wins and find a way to 4-2 here at the halfway mark of the season. But a lot for us to get into, and we will start off by just reminding you what you have to look forward to this weekend in the world of college football. So as I said, tomorrow night, you're going to have a few interesting matchups. You got Florida State in action going up against a 3-1 Virginia team there. Florida State, less than a touchdown favorite on the road there. So that could end up being maybe an interesting matchup there in Virginia. I know the game a lot of people are going to be excited about tomorrow, of course, is TCU and Arizona State. That's an 8 o'clock game tomorrow night. Arizona State, a 3.5-point favorite at home over TCU, who's now in the top 25. They're undefeated. And maybe this could be a preview of, whoever is representing the Big 12 in the college football playoff when all is said and done. But then you get into Saturday, you get into the meat and potatoes of the weekend, and starting off at 11 o'clock, you've got a couple of interesting ones. You've got a top 25 matchup in the Big 10, where you've got USC going to Illinois after they got beat by 53 points last week against Indiana. But I will say this, USC, I stayed up and watched them against Michigan State. And look, I don't think Michigan State's going to blow anybody away this year, but USC is fun to watch. Like, they're not – I'm not saying they're, the Caleb Williams, Lincoln Riley USC team or anything like that, but they're better than they have been the last couple of years. They look like a solid football team, so they're fun to watch. And then Illinois obviously trying to bounce back from getting embarrassed by the Fighting Curt Cignettis. Also at 11 o'clock, you've got Notre Dame and Arkansas. I think this one is interesting, Damien. I don't know how you feel about this one. But Notre Dame, obviously, I mean, if they lose this one, they're going to fall in the top 25. And if you're Arkansas, just the way they've lost in heartbreaking fashion the last 2 weeks, I just wonder, you get this game at home, but I guess I just have questions about mentally where that team is at right now because it's been tough.
I remember early in the season, we had hot takes, and I said that Arkansas will be undefeated at home. We're still in play, but I do think it's going to be an interesting game. I'm with you. I think Arkansas mentally, after being so close the past 2 weeks, and really, I think last week was more of you let it get away. Ole Miss, it was kind of back and forth, but Ole Miss always had they were consistently one step ahead.
Fair.
Whereas Memphis,
that was just
you let them off the
job.
hook. Yeah. You left Memphis off the hook. But I do think that if you want to get this thing right and kind of course correct, you get a win against a top 25 team in Notre Dame, you're feeling pretty good about the way the rest of the season could potentially go. Because you can't, if you've watched Arkansas, you can't deny they are talented. All the question marks that you had offensively of who's Taylor Green going to throw to, Omega Blake has kind of looked as the number one guy, but the other pieces that they have on that offense, they can hit you whichever way that you want. They can, if you want to go air raid, let's do it. If you want to be able to ground and pound, we can do that as well. So I think this is a gut check game for really both teams, both Notre Dame and Arkansas. It's all right, where do you go from this point forward?
No, I certainly agree with that. It's a big spot for both of these teams because again, if you're Notre Dame, if you lose this one, you're definitely done. Like the season's over for you in terms of making a playoff. And if you're Arkansas, to start off 2-0 the way that they looked, and to know that if you lose this game and you're at 2-3, there's an alternate reality out there where the ball bounces a different way twice, and you're 4-1 potentially, or who knows, maybe even 5-0 depending on how this game goes. But that's not reality for Arkansas right now. So that'll get you through the early morning slate on Saturday. Then at 2:30, you've got a whole mess of games at 2:30. So you've got Ohio State at Washington, and this one's interesting. So this was an interesting stat I saw. In the last 20 years, a number one team going up against an unranked opponent has only been a single-digit favorite twice. One of those games is Ohio State and Washington on Saturday. The other one was Notre Dame and USC back in like 2012 or something like that. And Notre Dame won and covered, if you care about that, the trends or whatever. But I just thought that was interesting. You got Ohio State going up against a Washington team that's undefeated, and a lot of people probably haven't been able to watch them this year, and maybe not familiar with Washington. But yeah, they look like a really solid team this year. So a good challenge there for Ohio State at 2:30, and then you've got some great SEC matchups. We already know you've got LSU at Ole Miss. Looks like Trinidad Chambliss is going to get the start for Ole Miss. I know Lane Kiffin, you said yesterday, "Oh, well, I didn't announce." I think we know that
we can read the room.
We can read the room, and I think that's you're the resident Ole Miss fan, so I'll let you have the final say. But I feel like that's the right move.
Oh, absolutely. He's the hot hand right now. And, for Austin Simmons, I don't necessarily think this is a knock in your confidence. It's, man, we know what we got in you, but what Trinidad is doing right now, until he shows it otherwise, come on. Like, just kind of just look at it. The offense looks a little more fluid, and just the way that he operates that offense, Trinidad, it's kind of interesting to see. I wish I would have known going into the season what this quarterback competition really looked like. I know you probably assumed that Austin Simmons is going to step in and take off. Not to say that he played terrible, but Trinidad Chambliss just has a different edge. The offense just looks different when he's out there. And through 3 games, like he's kind of shown, this may be the move for the rest of the way.
Yeah, man, Austin Simmons just wants to be Tua so bad. First he has to get hurt, and then he has to get in a quarterback controversy, and it's like, man, come on. Wants to be him so
he took
bad.
it to heart.
So
Billy
bad.
Raiola has Patrick Mahomes, and Austin Simmons has Tua.
Yeah, those are a little different. Even I can admit that, unfortunately. Anyways, moving on at 2:30 as well, at the same time as LSU Ole Miss. This would be a great weekend to invest in a second screen if you don't already have one. But you can have Auburn at Texas A&M. That game down in College Station. A&M still sitting around a 6.5-point favorite. That's going to be an interesting game. We all know it. We're going to break it down more for you coming up a little bit later in the show. So we'll save that for then. But that's at 2:30 as well. You also have Indiana at Iowa. I'm not watching that. I'll just be honest with you. I'm not trying to watch Iowa ever if I don't have to. And then also at 3:15, so kind of in the middle of all this, I think this is a sneaky, interesting game that maybe we're not talking about enough, and that is Tennessee at Mississippi State. Mississippi State's undefeated for the first time in over a decade. Tennessee's only a 7.5-point favorite on the road. I'm not saying that I think Mississippi State's going to win that game, but I think that game could be a lot more interesting than we thought it was going to be a month ago.
Yeah, ask Arizona State.
There you go.
That game, I'm telling you, Tennessee, do not think this is going – please don't start thinking this is going to be a cakewalk because, again, I don't like Mississippi State because they are my rivals. But what they've done through 4 games, there's a sense of belief. There's a sense of belief that, hey, we can really compete right now in year 2 under Jeff Lebby. And you saw it trending last year where it's, okay, this team just doesn't have the juice right now. But when they finally do get a few pieces – watch out. Now, did I think they were going to – I had a gut feeling that they would pull off an upset against Arizona State, but I didn't know they could go blow for blow and jump on them as quickly as they did. Yeah. So if you're Tennessee, you better start fast because if this becomes a track meet, Mississippi State can hang this year. They really can.
Well, and again, if you're Tennessee, right, you're trying to pick yourself up after, I know you played UAB last weekend, but, the last SEC game against Georgia and everything. You just wonder, right, if you start to get into a mindset where Mississippi State jumps out on you a little bit early, are you able to bounce back from that and recover? So that's going to be an interesting game at 3:15 Saturday. And then the night slate, as we know, you've got your game day game. That's going to be Oregon at Penn State. It's a whiteout there in Happy Valley. 3.5 point favorite there for the Nittany Lions. I'm probably leaning Oregon in that one. And again, prove me wrong, James Franklin. But until then, I'm going to bet against you every single time. And then you have, of course, the game that we're all the most excited for this weekend, Kentucky at South Carolina, because that's a big SEC matchup that you've got this weekend. But Cole Kubelik will be on the call for that one, and they do a great job. That crew does, as always, of course. And then seriously, you have the big one, Alabama at Georgia at 6:30 as well. So that just tells you right there. That is I think we just gave you at least 10 games that are going to be coming up in a 24-hour period that I'm not going to say they're all necessarily must watch, but for me, they're all must watch games. And so I'm going to find time to watch every single one of those, even if I have to go back on Sunday and double back on some of them. But yeah, can't wait for this weekend. Going to be the best weekend of the season so far, in my opinion, maybe the best week of the season overall when all is said and done. So let's dive into some of these matchups a little bit more. We gave you brief thoughts on some of the earlier ones, but of course we got to go deeper into Alabama and Georgia as well as Auburn, Texas A&M. So we'll tell you the latest injury news for both programs, as well as I have a question about this Alabama Georgia game I want to get Damien's thoughts on, as well as the listeners. So let's dive in a little deeper into Alabama Georgia, Auburn, Texas and A&M later. That's all here next on Morning Jocks. 616, welcome back into the Thursday edition of Morning Jocks. Conrad and Damian here with you, getting you ready for an exciting weekend of college football action. And that means we have to talk more about Alabama and Auburn and their respective matchups this weekend because it's two big ones. And I think both fan bases will feel really, really good about the position they're in with a win over the weekend. And I think both programs with a loss will certainly have some questions. And certainly, I think for a lot of Alabama fans, especially if you start off a season 2-2, that's unfamiliar territory. It's been a long time since that's happened, and so there will be some interesting conversations on Monday, as we know. But let's get you ready for some of these matchups coming up this weekend. So first, I did say we'd give you some injury news for both of these programs because you had your availability reports come out last night, at least the first edition of them. So for the Alabama-Georgia game, this is what they're working with. So you're going to be missing two guys if you're Alabama. Of course, Jamarian Latham, who we know suffered that neck injury in practice the other day and is recovering from that. He's going to be out for a while. So he's not going to be available against Georgia. You've also got Jeremiah Beeman, another defensive player who's going to be out. And he's missed the last couple of games now. And then you have two guys that are listed as probable. You have Danny Lewis, the tight end, and then Tim Keenan still listed as probable. But as we know, as Kane Womack said earlier in this week, he's going to go on Saturday, but maybe going to be on a snap count or something along those lines as he works himself back. But definitely expecting for Tim Keenan and Danny Lewis to both go for Alabama. Now, on the Georgia side of things in that matchup, you got a few guys that are out. So the big news right now is that one of their offensive linemen, Ernest Green III, he's the right tackle there for the Georgia Bulldogs. He is doubtful for this game. So that could potentially be something that works to the advantage of Alabama. That could be something that becomes a little bit of an issue for Georgia. And then you also have tight end Ethan Barber, another offensive lineman. He's their backup center. Malachi Tolliver, he's going to be out. And then Thomas Blackshear, a receiver for the Georgia Bulldogs, he's going to be out as well. So that's your availability report there for Alabama and Georgia. Now, how about on the other side for Auburn as they go take on Texas A&M? So if you missed the news yesterday, unfortunate that Hugh Freeze reported Horatio Fields, the wide receiver who had transferred from Wake Forest. He broke his foot in practice on Tuesday, so he's going to be out. And then Darrell Robinson's still out dealing with that strange injury he had a couple of weeks ago. And hopefully he'll be able to get back on the field sooner rather than later. But those are the two guys that are going to be out for the Auburn Tigers. You've got two guys questionable, and Amaris Williams and Connor Liu, two big pieces on both sides of the ball for the Auburn Tigers. So those would be massive gains if Auburn's able to get those guys on the field on Saturday. And then some guys listed as probable. You got Malcolm Simmons, Caleb Harris, Jeremiah Cobb, and Jay Crawford there, all listed as probable for Auburn. Not a whole lot going on for Texas A&M. Bryce Anderson, he's a safety. He's going to be out for the game. And then one of their linebackers, Scooby Williams, is questionable. So that's your injury availability updates here as it stands on Thursday morning. And of course, you know, those will continue to keep an eye on those over the next couple of days. But both teams, Alabama and Auburn, seem to be relatively healthy. You're missing a couple guys up front for Alabama on the defense, and then the Horatio Fields injury. Certainly not good news for Auburn. And a lot of that, too, because I thought it was interesting, Damian, when over the offseason you had heard Hugh Freeze say, you know, he was honestly the leader of that room, just somebody that had a lot of experience coming over from Wake Forest. But you think of Eric Singleton and Cam Coleman and Malcolm Simmons and some of these other guys. And it's cool that Horatio Fields was able to come in and gain that respect early on. But if you were an Auburn fan, this does mean you're going to get, according to Hugh Freeze, an extended look at Perry Thompson.
Yeah, somebody that they've really just been wanting to see come along. You know, you hate the injury bug. It's the worst part of the ball. It's the worst part of the game. But Horatio Fields, he kind of took that Keandre Lambert-Smith role where he's the older of the bunch, may not be, quote-unquote, as the most talented guy in the room, but he assumed the leadership role for a bunch of young guys that's just looking for guidance. And it's one of those things that you hate that has happened, but for the offense in the way that it is, it's not that big of a drop off because again, like you said, we're getting a little bit more Perry Thompson, and we've seen what Malcolm Simmons and Cam Coleman and the rest of those guys have been able to do. It's just kind of a missing piece in that wheel, but you don't have that big of a drop off when the next guy has to step up and make plays. So, I hope for a speedy recovery. But as far as that receiver room, I think they're still gonna be talented for sure.
Yeah, no doubt about it there. So that's your update. What's going on with Alabama and Auburn on the injury front? Now, a couple of comments because you had K Coach last night with Kalen DeBoer. Just a couple of comments that I thought were interesting. So this will make some Alabama fans happy because, as you know, and this goes back before Nick Saban retired. This isn't just a Kalen DeBoer problem. But Alabama's had issues on the road, and they've had issues communicating on the road, too many penalties, things like that. So Kalen DeBoer was kind of asked about that and how they're preparing for the noise there in Athens over the weekend. And he said, quote, communication in an environment like we're going to be in is certainly a challenge, but we couldn't get it any louder than we had it today. I promise you that. You couldn't hear the person right next to you at practice. So, okay, they're, I assume, doing a little more than Arizona State did with the one person ringing the cowbells, which clearly did not prepare them for that environment. So that's a good thing to hear, right? That's something you want to see Alabama working on. And if Alabama is going to win this game on Saturday, you would think you're going to have to be better in that regard than you have been in recent memory, at least. There was another moment where somebody had called in and asked Kalen DeBoer, kind of brought up the, hey, so when you wear the black hoodie, kind of a good omen for Alabama. So is that going to change? And Kalen DeBoer said that a couple of players had brought that to his attention now, as well as some family members. And so he said, yeah, I think he'll be wearing the black hoodie on Saturday. So if anybody was worried about what he's going to be wearing, he will be riding the hot hand as far as the black hoodie goes there. A little bit more of Alabama news as it was announced last night. Kind of a surprise, but Ty Simpson is now a Gatorade NIL athlete. So he got a new NIL deal last night with Gatorade, or it was announced last night at least. So I don't know. I guess he'll be more hydrated for the Georgia game or something. I don't know, but that's pretty cool. I mean, I don't know. I feel like that's one of those things as a kid. Like,
Oh yeah, you love
there's
it.
just certain, Gatorade, Nike. Like, there's just certain brands that you affiliate with
Absolutely.
being an athlete, and that's pretty cool.
All right, you're gonna ship me how many flavors? Oh yeah, come on, you got you.
Well, they weren't getting a good ROI, I don't think, on those DJ Lagway ads right now, so they needed to branch out
Come
just
on, man.
a little bit. I'm sorry, that was cruel. Anyways, but that's kind of your updates of what's going on in the lead up to the Alabama and Georgia game. And so I just wanted to have this discussion quickly here because we do want to talk Auburn and Texas A&M as well coming up. But we had people that were texting into three-man front yesterday, and a couple people said, you know, I want to pick Alabama because, the recent success over Georgia, or it just feels like they have some good momentum right now. But what did they do better than Georgia? Like, what can you actually look at from this season and go, I think Alabama is better in that area than Georgia is? And so I want to get some of your thoughts on this, Damian, and the listeners as well, 205-834-9450, if you'd like to get in on the courtesy GMC text line. Because I was going through it in my head, and in my opinion, I think there's three spots where I would give right now, I would definitely give the advantage to Alabama. Now, maybe some of them would be a bigger advantage than others, but I think there's three spots that I look at and I go, okay, Alabama's better at those spots. And if they can be better in those spots on Saturday, I think they're going to have a chance. And those for me, I think they're better at quarterback right now than Gunnar Stockton. I think Ty Simpson's better than Gunnar Stockton. Now, granted, he has to show that he can perform the same way he did the last two games against Georgia. And that's, that's a bit of a question. I'll admit that. But I think that what you've seen Ty Simpson do is when he is on, that dude is on. And I think for Gunnar Stockton, he showed us something in the second half of the Tennessee game, but can you do that for a full 60 minutes? I think is a fair question for him. I think wide receiver, Alabama, you certainly have an advantage at that spot. And that might be the biggest advantage that you have in a single position group. And then I think in the secondary, I think Alabama certainly has an advantage there. And I know some people, we had people yesterday, oh, well, Alabama hasn't played anybody. And that's fair, right? They haven't played a team that can throw the ball as well as Tennessee did, like Georgia has. But coming into the year, I mean, we all agreed that Alabama probably had the best secondary in college football. And now they'll be tested at a different degree this weekend. They weren't really tested that much against Florida State because they were just able to run it down Alabama's throat. But I think they still have arguably the best secondary, the most talented secondary in the country. And I would give Alabama certainly an advantage in that area. I do think there's a few spots where it's kind of a wash, though, to be honest with you. I don't think Georgia's offensive line is particularly impressive, just like Alabama's is. I mean, they're good, but they're not. I wouldn't say Joe
Not leaps
Moore.
and bounds.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
yeah. I would say those are pretty equal. I think honestly, on the other side of the trenches as well, I mean, Georgia's and Alabama both, they don't have a dominant edge rusher. They're both tied for the second fewest sacks in the entire SEC right now. I just think there's a lot of categories where you kind of look and go, okay, they're equal. I think Georgia has a better run game. I think Georgia has better tight ends, maybe better linebacker play. But in general, I think those are the spots that Alabama's better. And I think there are honestly a lot of spots where you would just kind of look and go, that's kind of a coin flip, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with you at all three spots as well, especially in the secondary. I think that's where you don't have the Malachi Starks for Georgia in the secondary. You don't have the Keely Ringos and things like that where
The
it
guys you're
felt
used to seeing back
yeah,
there.
yeah, it just felt like they were all on a string. Like the flow of their secondary just looked like they know exactly what's going on. Not to say that these guys can't necessarily step up and do that, but I would lean Alabama in that position as well. I think the interesting conversation is the quarterback position. I do think Gunnar Stockton's a better, and it's not by like a landslide, but I'd say he's got a little bit more wiggle. Not to say Ty Simpson doesn't, but Gunnar Stockton is more of a running threat.
He's just like a bully running the ball too.
Yeah. And I think that if I'll put it like this, if the game came down to say Alabama shuts down Georgia's run game and they have to air it out, I would lean more to Ty Simpson as far as it becomes, if you have to make a team one-dimensional who would have more success in that one dimension, I would lean Alabama in their passing game, along with the receivers that they have as well, because they're all a little bit older. And Jeremy and Ryan have played in the system a lot longer. Isaiah Horton's starting to come along. Lazir Brooks is starting to come along as well. I think the depth at the receiver position for Alabama is starting to show a little bit. Like you got some younger guys that are starting to step up. But I do think that if the game if Georgia shows any sort of, I guess you'd say, stifling that Alabama run game and it just never gets off, and you're putting the ball in Ty Simpson's hands to make throws that he needs to make, I think that leans more into Alabama's favor. Like if you really want to make this a throw-a-thon, I think for Georgia you're telling Ty Simpson to beat you with his arm, and I think he's talented enough to do that. Now you flip it around, I don't think Gunnar Stockton is as consistently accurate enough that if Alabama says, "Hey, we're making Gunnar Stockton beat us through the air," I think that leans into Alabama's secondary favor.
I got it. So you're saying, if neither team can run the ball effectively, then you're going to feel much better about Alabama's chances. Okay, yeah, no, I agree with that because I do think that I mean that's, in my opinion, that's the key to the victory for Alabama, right? Can Ty Simpson go and carve up Georgia's secondary like Tennessee did? Because if that can happen, you can win this game. I don't think there's any doubt about that. If you can't do that, I do not have faith that Alabama's running game is good enough to win in this football game if Ty Simpson's not able to capitalize through the air. So it's going to be fascinating. I wanted to get some of your thoughts on that as well, and we'll talk a little bit more about all these games tomorrow, of course, as we make our picks as we do each and every Friday. But we have to turn our attention to the other side of the state now, as the Auburn Tigers have a big one coming up in College Station. What's on the line for Auburn this weekend? What do we need to see different from Auburn from the Oklahoma matchup to this week that's going to make us confident that Auburn's going to go out there, get back on track, and walk out of College Station with the W? Because it is a revenge game for Texas A&M, and they are I don't think they've forgotten about last year. So we'll dive more into Auburn, Texas A&M. That's next here on Morning JOX. Appreciate you tuning us in here each and every morning for Morning Jocks. Conrad and Damien here with you. Talking a little bit of Alabama and Georgia there in the last segment, just kind of breaking down where we think maybe Alabama has an advantage, at least on paper, heading into Athens on Saturday. And now we turn our attention to the Auburn matchup as they have a big one coming up in College Station, going up against those fighting Texas A&M Aggies, who right now are one of the, according to the AP poll, at least one of the 10 best teams in the country, coming off a 41-40 victory over Notre Dame a couple of weeks ago. So Texas A&M, they were on bye last week. They got to sit, get healthy, have an extra week to prepare. Auburn was over in Norman, Oklahoma, and we don't have to go back down that path. I know a lot of people would rather look. I would rather forget my last, adventure in Norman, Oklahoma as well. So we can bond over that, Auburn fans. I promise
It
you.
happens.
It happens. It happens to the best of us. Unfortunately, it happened to both Alabama and Auburn here in the last 12 months, but that's neither here nor there. So Auburn trying to get back on track against a very good Texas A&M team this year. And I will say this, I think right off the bat, the most obvious part of this matchup that intrigues me and I think will tell you a lot about what happens in this game is this Auburn secondary going up against Marcel Reed and the Texas A&M wide receivers, because what you have in Mario Craver, who's one of the leading receivers in the entire country, Casey Concepcion, I mean, they have a two-headed monster there at the wide receiver position. And with the way that Marcel Reed has played early on this season, I mean, they have an element to their game of down the field passing that we haven't seen from Texas A&M in a really long time, honestly. And so, if you're Auburn, that I think has to be at the top of your priority list of can you contain those receivers and can you prevent them from burning you over the top on a consistent basis on Saturday? Because if that happens, I feel like it's probably going to be a long day for the Auburn Tigers, if I'm being completely honest with myself. But if you can take that away from them, I think if you're Auburn, I think you certainly have an advantage. I think Texas A&M has a good running game, and I think it's actually kind of comparable how they have two running backs they like. They have a mobile quarterback, just like you have with Auburn, with Alston and Cobb and Jackson Arnold, what they can do. But Auburn, what we have seen from them is they have a more dominant running game when they're doing it effectively, and they didn't do that effectively against Oklahoma. And so now I just question: can you do that against Texas A&M? Because Texas A&M, again, they're solid on defense, but they are not what you had against Oklahoma. This is not going to be that same caliber of defensive line, at least not that we've seen so far from Texas A&M. So I think if you're Auburn, you have to feel better about your prospects of being able to run the football more effectively. I think with the passing game of Jackson Arnold, I'll be honest with you. I think you got to give. I mean, you got to give Cam Coleman double-digit targets in this game, right? With what he's shown and how physical he can be. And even, with Jackson Arnold, you can tell that he's uncertain at times. That's why he's holding on to the ball as long as he is. I think if you're Hugh Freeze, there's certain times where you almost just tell him, man, I would rather you just throw it up for Cam, give him an opportunity. And look, if it ends up being a turnover, then so be it. Maybe we can get on the receivers for not going and making a play on the defender to prevent that from happening. But I'd rather see that than, oh no, it's another 2nd and 17 because Jackson Arnold is backpedaling in the pocket, holding onto the football for too long. So I think those are certainly some interesting factors to this. We know how important it's going to be for Auburn to be able to get after Marcel Reed and be able to affect him because while, they didn't have their most dominant performance against Oklahoma in terms of getting John Mateer down, they still are one of the leaders in the SEC in terms of sacks this year. So can that defensive front continue to show a little bit of what they did in the first few games and maybe wasn't there quite as much as you needed against Oklahoma? Can that come back against Texas A&M? So I think this is a really, really fascinating game. I think, again, for Auburn, going on the road to Texas A&M, I mean, there's going to be a slight lean towards the Aggies, I think, from a lot of people. But we've seen I think maybe this version of Texas A&M is a little bit better than what we saw last year, but I think this version of Auburn is significantly better than last year's Auburn team. And you saw Auburn take down Texas A&M last year. Granted, it was an overtime and it was on the Plains, but if there's a game I feel like you're going to have confidence going into for Auburn, it's probably this one because you can look back and go, oh, we beat these guys last year.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps.
Absolutely. I'm with you. I think defensively for Auburn, the quicker you can light Marcel Reed up and heat him up, get his feet talking, the better it's going to be for you because he's not the most accurate passer. Like everybody's trying to going back to Notre Dame game, they're talking about he needs to be in Heisman conversations. The brother was 17 for 37 in the game. Like he's shown he's not as accurate as you want him to be.
No.
So the more pressure you put on him, now granted your secondary is going to have to they got to play some real dudes in Casey Concepcion and Mario Craver. But I think if you get him off his first read, his feet start talking to him. And I think with what you have defensively up front, you can put some pressure. I know DJ Durkin, he's going to dial it up. So the biggest thing is can you be effective with that pressure and make Marcel Reed inaccurate because he's shown that he is. Now, if he stands in the pocket, give him some time, yeah, he may dice you up. But I do think the quicker you can kind of get him off of his game, the better it's going to play for you. And I think offensively, you've got to stick to what is working. That's it. Because I do think that going back and watching Oklahoma, at no point, and again, I know how the RPO system is set up, and not to say that Jackson was making some misreads or, just consistent, but to put the ball in his arms, in his hands that many times for him to make passes down the field instead of just lining up and actually trying to establish something run-wise. And granted, I will say Oklahoma's defensive front was a little bit different, but when you had creases, you had explosive plays from Jeremiah Cobb. You saw Damari Alston start to get a little bit of some momentum. So can you lean into that? Because I do think that you can kind of push this A&M team around a little bit. Like if you really want to get physical with them, you kind of have the edge because the fact that if it isn't a play action fake or you do decide to pull it on an RPO, you got the advantage at receivers over their secondary. You've got it. So I think for Auburn, whatever that plan is starting to show you, lean into it. If you get some explosive runs, don't be afraid to go back to it because I do think that what you have in Jeremiah Cobb and Damari Alston, as far as the run game, and even Jackson Arnold with his legs, you can really dictate the flow of this game by having success in the run game. And I do think that they can do that at a high level. I would take the very same approach I had with Baylor week 1. If they're going to give us this, we need to be able to take it. And I think that Auburn can do that. It's just, are they going to, instead of being stubborn and trying to throw the ball and forcing down the field, how about we let the game come to us and say, okay, if we're getting 5-6 yards a pop, let's keep this thing rolling. Let's just stick to it and don't shy away from it because it's only going to make it easier for those islands to open up if they got to commit to the box. And that's when Jackson Arnold has to be a smart decision maker.
Well, and like you said, right, play to your strengths. And I know, look, Auburn has elite talent at wide receiver, and I totally understand that. We know what kind of offense Hugh Freeze likes to have, what kind of plays he likes to call. Totally understand that. They're a better running team than they are a passing team right now. And I think we talked about it, with the Oklahoma game is you got away from that what felt like very early in that game where it was almost like all right, we're just not going to be able to run the ball, so let's just start trying to throw it and put the game in Jackson Arnold's hands. And clearly that, ultimately didn't work out for them. Now, part of that is, yes, Oklahoma's defensive front was doing a good job of stopping the run, but it felt like there was, again, like you got to grind it out a little bit. And even if in the first half, we're just, we're getting 2 or 3 yards of carry. And I understand like it can be easy to want to go away from that, but you got to grind it out, right? You got to look at this as, now I understand, right? It's different if you're down multiple scores and you have to throw it to get back into it. But, can you grind it out to where in the third and especially in the fourth quarter, that defensive front for A&M is just so tired of having to defend the run that's where you start to get your opportunities, right? Can you get it to that point of the game, like you're saying, Damon, where you kind of control the pace of it? And maybe it takes a while, but eventually your style of play wins over what Texas A&M is doing, even if it's just from straight up exhaustion, because you don't want to get away from your strengths too much. And I think we've seen with Jackson Arnold, right? He can make good throws, and a lot of it is he has really good receivers that can go up there and get a ball. But again, I just don't know how many games for Auburn this year, especially with some of the teams they're going to have to play. If you're looking at it as Jackson Arnold's going to have to throw us to a victory, I don't know if you feel that great about your prospects if that's how it looks going into it. So,
and for as bad as your offensive line looked last week, they probably would much rather maul a couple of people. Like, let's actually run the ball and let's establish something because pass pro was a little dicey last week. So they're trying to course correct themselves.
Yeah, no, No, I think that's a great point. You're spot on with that. So those are some of our thoughts there on Auburn and Texas A&M. What's going on there in College Station on Saturday? So what are your thoughts on Auburn, Texas A&M? What are your big concerns if you're an Auburn fan? Are you particularly confident about this matchup? Because I will say this: I thought, with the Oklahoma game, Texas A&M, and Georgia, that being this 3 game stretch for Auburn, I thought the Oklahoma game was probably the least likely win for Auburn, just because going to Norman, what Auburn or what Oklahoma had defensively, and then you throw John Mateer into that mix, that one felt difficult. I'm not saying these next 2 games aren't difficult, but this is a team that you beat last year. You mentioned some of the deficiencies that you can get out of a guy like Marcel Reed and take advantage of. And then with Georgia, you get that game at home, right? So I think this week and next week are certainly better opportunities for Auburn to get a big win and a potentially a top 10 victory for Auburn. That would be absolutely massive. So we want to hear from you. 205-834-9450. That'll get you on the courtesy GMC text line. You can also call in on the phone lines. We'd love to hear from you. Your thoughts on Auburn, Texas A&M, Alabama, Georgia, and the rest of the college football weekend. We'll hear from you next on Morning Jocks. A few more minutes here on the Thursday edition of Morning Jocks. Conrad and Damian here with you, breaking down week 5 around the college football world. Big opportunities for both Alabama and Auburn this weekend in their respective matchups. And we want to remind you as well, you got football tonight in the NFL, not in the college, but you have NFL football tonight. You're going to have the Seattle Seahawks and the Arizona Cardinals. So an NFC West matchup there coming up on Amazon Prime Video. Seahawks a slight favorite in that one. And I mean, honestly, well, I don't know. I never take the Cardinals seriously because there's just been too many years here in the last handful where they start off really strong and you're like, man, all right, maybe the Cardinals are for real this year. And then they just collapse at the end of the year. But Seahawks looking pretty good this year with Sam Darnold and some of the new faces up there. Jalen Milroe, of course, granted, hasn't been a factor so far this year, but maybe later on. But he's
you paying Sam Darnold over $100 million. You know, just you kind of want him out there.
Hey, Jalen Milroe has 4 rushing yards this year, Damian.
There we go. That's 4 more than I thought he was going to have.
That's 4 more than I'll ever have in the NFL. That's for certain. So that's the NFL action that you have coming up for you tonight there with the Seahawks and the Cardinals. But we do want to hear from some of you chiming in on the Courtesy GMC text line 205-834-9450. And we will start with this one from Bobby, who chimes in and is going back and forth with Damian here. See, I like that now. See, because now you got this skin in the game with Ole Miss, and it's just a different perspective. I like it. So Bobby chimes in. He says, sorry, Damian, but your Ole Miss Rebels are going down this weekend by a score of 27-10. Go Tigers.
And I replied, I'm not sorry, Bobby, but we're beating the sleeves off y'all 38-21.
Okay.
I'm very
confident.
I'm not lying to you. I am very confident in this game. That Ole Miss is absolutely about to light LSU on fire. I really do believe it.
Yeah, and we'll do our picks tomorrow coming up around 6:30 on the show, but I like Ole Miss, but you're confident not only in the win, but
yeah,
like double digits.
From start to finish, I think people will know that Ole Miss dominated this game.
And we're going to have to start taking them seriously as
I mean, who's not taking us serious? Have you not seen what our offense has been able to do?
All right, so Ole Miss beats LSU and Alabama beats Georgia. Is Ole Miss, in your opinion, the best team in the SEC at that point?
Is that even a question?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I don't know.
Absolutely.
Okay. What if Texas A&M beats Auburn?
I mean, they can throw their name in there, but it's Ole Miss.
Okay.
Hotty toddy, brother.
I like it. Let's see. This text rolls in. It says, LSU, big sorry, brother. That defense is nasty, and Ole Miss has been playing awful defenses. So not
LSU's offense is just founded all together. You play Southeastern Louisiana. How many times did you score more than 20 points up until that point? Yeah.
It's a good point.
Yeah. It's okay.
It's a good point. I just...
You could barely score 20 points on Louisiana Tech.
I totally understand that. It just feels like this is the kind of game where if you're going to, like... I guess this is me wishful thinking, right? I just want it to be a high-scoring game. Like, I'm going to be disappointed if LSU rolls out there with 21 points or some crap like that.
And if it is a high-scoring game, who do you lean towards?
Well, Ole Miss.
Exactly.
Ole Miss also led the entire game last year and then lost on the final play.
Is it 2024, Conrad, or is it 2025? Stop talking about the past. That was when Jackson Dart was at quarterback. We got Trinidad Chambliss, dog. Lock in.
Which one of those guys is the quarterback for the New York Giants right now?
Well, Trinidad is he's
trending in that. Is he trending in that direction though? First round pick coming up next year. Yeah, we'll see. I like Ole Miss as well, but we'll give you our picks on all those games coming up tomorrow.
And before you continue, we had a caller call in. We lost him over the break.
Yeah,
but he asked if Auburn should have thrown Deuce Knight in there to help with the deep ball accuracy offensively against Oklahoma. And I'll personally tell you that if Deuce Knight would have seen that Oklahoma defense, he would have been in the transfer portal at the end of the game.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I don't think that would be.
You can't throw that freshman out there to that.
No, that would not have been a good idea. But again, as we know, backup quarterback always the most popular player on the team. This text rolls in and says, "Hey guys, just wanted to tell you how much I enjoy the show. Also gets me street cred with my son when I drop awesome football facts." Well, good. I'm glad that we can help you out. And appreciate you listening each and every morning. All right, John Mack, our resident Texas A&M Aggie, he says, "Well, let me retort. You've given Auburn every chance to win. This is why they won't. The 110,000 12th man Aubie players will be claiming we pump in sound. Marcel Reed has 2 NFL receivers and will throw for 300 yards. Auburn couldn't beat a quarterback with a broken hand. The Aggie offensive line will take over this game in the end. We're back tomorrow at 6 a.m. Macaron Kublik is next.